And it continues to remain a very dire state of affairs when it comes to the restaurant industry. In fact, they say that they're back to the situation that they saw at the peak of the pandemic, and all the recovery that they had seen has been completely undone due to the lockdown restrictions and as well as curfews that have been reimposed in the country and particularly in the state of Maharashtra. Joining in to discuss the sector in greater detail and what more is required in order to help the flailing sector is Anurag Katriar, who is the president at the National Restaurant Association of India, or NRAI. Anurag, thanks so much for taking time out. And after having experienced all of the trouble that you went through with last year's lockdown, this definitely comes as a body blow for the sector. How bad is the impact with the second wave and all of the curfews and restrictions that have been imposed on the restaurant industry?
Thank you so much for having me here. So, the first wave itself was fairly backbreaking. We had a very huge mortality rate, almost, we reckon 30% of the restaurants shut down in the first wave. And, post-October, despite the restriction in the number of seats that we could have people occupy, limited operating hours, we were still, that sense of optimism was back. We were thinking that we are just about beating the worst days of our life, and then this comes. Now, this phase, if you look at right now, we are virtually at a standstill. I mean, people can give it whatever name. You can call it a night curfew, restricted operation. But for all practical purposes, the restaurant business today stays shut. It's a lockdown for us. I can give you a very quick detail about how it impacts various segments within the F&B business. So if you take number one, fine dining. Now, it has no relevance if right now restaurants are shut and only deliveries are allowed, because they are more about experiences. For casual diners, only about 10 to 15% of the business comes from the deliveries, which means there is nothing. For catering, it's zero. For bars and pubs and restaurants, it's zero. So the only segment which probably has little to be satisfied with is the QSR and the cloud kitchen business, which is a very minuscule part of the overall F&B pie. So, I mean, this is just to give you a sense of how badly the sector is hit right now. And at a time when we were anyway on our knees, now this is like somebody has hit us once again.
Yeah, and during the last year, did the industry get any sort of support from, say, your vendors, your investors, landlords? Has that been extended this time around as well with the second wave, or is there absolutely no support?
Last time we did get some support from our channel partners, our landlords, and employees were very understanding. And from the government part, there was very little that came through, to be honest. We were one of those industries that was fairly left to fend for itself, and nothing has changed. It's a sense of deja vu for me all over again. We have started to engage with all the other stakeholders in the ecosystem. Nothing concrete has come out yet. These are only early days of the lockdown. And hopefully next few days, everybody will understand that if the business has to survive, the sector has to remain afloat, then every stakeholder in the ecosystem has to come forward with a one single objective: let's save the trade, because we all depend on it. There is no two ways about it. And this time, I think the role of the government is even more critical. And I hope they take us a little more seriously this year than what they did last year. Last year, we were left completely to fend for ourselves.
Anurag also wanted to understand, now with the second lockdown already starting in Maharashtra, in Delhi as well, a lot of curbs and curfews being put across the nation in many states as well. Also a lot of concerns in Hyderabad, Kolkata, now a night curfew even in places like Goa. Much stricter action, you think, is going to be announced? What are you expecting?
No, beyond this, I mean, there is nothing that is left anyways for us. It's what we are doing right now as a business. Let me put it in one single line. All our restaurants or whatever locations we have become delivery kitchens for certain hours of the day. That's it. Now, how worse can it really get from here? I don't see. But, one thing that I would definitely like to add, and this is for the government to to hopefully act upon is, with all these curfews and lockdowns, you have put very strict conditions. But when you have allowed, say, a home delivery business to function, you must do everything to ensure that our people are not harassed on the roads, the e-curfew passes, and whatever other, permissions are to be given should be made very smooth and glitch-free. I mean, for example, I just read in the papers today that in Maharashtra now the local trains are not available for anybody beyond the medical fraternity and the government officials. Now, this is a little impractical. My restaurant is functioning as a kitchen today. So I have kitchen people, the housekeepers, etc., working, the delivery boys working. How do you expect them to go back home? So these are little things where the government can do a lot. And this is the least they can do to help the beloved sector like ours at this stage.
Anurag, I don't know if you would have this data or if there is any stats available on how many restaurants have had to completely shut shop since the start of the pandemic across the country.
We reckon the data is around 30%. 30% of the restaurants across the country, they shut down. And there was a little higher concentration in larger cities. And I think it is because of higher cost of establishment in these large cities. And these are not confined to very small companies or mom and pop shops. Even larger corporations had to shut down lots of locations. So it is very well spread, and about 30% of the restaurants have shut down since the beginning of the pandemic last year.
And what's the estimate this time, Anurag, with the second wave and, these very strict curfews being implemented as to, who could perhaps sustain and survive the second wave? How much percent, or do you think that it'll be as dire as the first wave?
I wish I had a very clear answer to that. As of now, it seems there will be mortalities. I can't put a finger to the number because that will largely depend on how long do these lockdowns continue and under what circumstances are we allowed to reopen again. Because that will decide how we are going. But one thing, which is the prime reason why the restaurant companies and restaurants are shutting down, is actually liquidity crunch. And this is where I believe it's time for the government to treat us as one of the stress sectors and give us some liquidity support to formal financial banking institutions. Just give it with real moratoriums. Give it with, little lesser interest rates and maybe little less collateral as well. Because that's the only way you can prevent the mortality of the business. And one must not forget that we being such a significant employer of human capital, with every restaurant shutting down, there are so many houses where, the employment is lost. Imagine out of 7.3 million people that we employed, if 30% of the restaurants have shut down and and balance restaurants are operating with limited capacities, limited hours, even if we take a very, conservative estimate of 40% job losses, that's almost 3 million jobs already being lost. And this could have largely been prevented if there was timely liquidity infusion into the sector. We have been totally left out. Even, lots of unknown businesses, like I remember in the 20 lakh crore package, there were packages for bees and butterflies and fishes and everything, but unfortunately F&B was left out.
Yeah. Anurag, how about, the vaccination drive for the industry? What's the situation like over there? Is it that majority of the staff or employees are below the age of 45? And how many have been vaccinated so far? Just, approximate numbers as to whether that's moving smoothly?
No, in fact, most of our workforce is fairly young. So if I look at percentage of vaccinations done, that will not be as high. We had in fact written to the government saying that treat us like frontline workers and give us, an opportunity to vaccinate our people. We in fact offered to bear the cost of it as well as organizations. But unfortunately, nothing worked out. I think right now, vaccine is a very sensitive subject and it's not really in great supply. So no, I mean, to be very truthful to you, it's not that a very huge portion of our workforce is already vaccinated. there is a huge way to cover it still.
Okay, and what's the situation like in Mumbai in particular? If you could give us a sense in terms of numbers for organized and unorganized outlets versus the total that stand in the state of Maharashtra, and how much of an impact it's had due to these curfews in the city of Mumbai.
No, the business is very negligible right now. It's one thing that certain aspects of business like home deliveries are allowed, but the actual offtake is very minimal because the consumer sentiments are not the best right now. With all these restrictions, the number of cases going up, there is a general stress in the market. And eating out in our country is much beyond just, topping your tummy. It's about a little bit of an experience, little bit of celebration. Now, that has completely gone out because of lack of sentiment. I don't think right now, I don't have any authentic number of last 2 weeks to 2.5 weeks. But I don't reckon the overall F&B business in Maharashtra will be anything more than single digit of what it used to be in pre-COVID times. It'll be under 10%. Because, and I can give you a reason for it. The delivery business was anyway anything between 12 to 15% of the overall pie. Now that is also working with certain restrictions and with lower consumer sentiment. I don't see we will be at a very high level of transaction right now.
I know you said that the fate of the sector depends largely on what's announced by the government by way of curfews, lockdowns, restrictions, etc. But what's the future of the industry, assuming that things don't recover for quite some time? Is it going to be just sort of continuing with this small percentage of this home deliveries, cloud kitchens, digitizing? How does the sector hope to really pivot and make themselves a lot more relevant in this new age?
I think one thing that I have been very steadfast about is we all need to look at low risk and asset light models for now. And I say that because, as you rightly said, I don't know whether second wave, third wave, whatever wave is coming, or there is a new virus in the pipeline. There are lots of uncertainties now. I don't want to sound very negative, but there are definite uncertainties. The erstwhile model where, typically the proportion of fixed operating costs were very high for a restaurant is totally unsustainable in these times. So I think lots of efforts will go into reimagining businesses. And the way I see things moving forward are twofolds. The e-commerce will continue to grow, and that is where I see a huge need for a very, equitable and robust e-commerce policy. And on the other hand, I think lots of non-serious players will take an exit from the trade, and serious players will come back. And I think substance will have to take precedence over styling, which has become the norm in the last few years. So it will in the hands of creative restaurateurs will come up with things which bring back people into the restaurants. But I think unless the fear of COVID from the minds of the people is gone and there is little more discretionary expenses in the hands of the people, we are in for some tough time. So reduce your cost and right now look at asset light and low risk models is what we are thinking of. But we still need two very big bucket support from the government. I know I've been very repetitive about it. Give us some liquidity support right now so that we can arrest the mortality rate. And going forward, we are not seeking money. We understand the government coffers are under strain, but please give us adequate policy support. A very small thing like the restoration of input tax credit on GST can help us in a very significant way in an era where the consumption is really going down. And I spoke a little while ago about e-commerce policy. These are the little things that the government can easily do, and that will help us survive for now and perhaps thrive later.
Thanks very much, Anurag, for joining in, and fingers crossed that the situation does improve. That's the word coming in from NRAI. They're back down on their knees and back to square one in terms of the situation with restaurants shutting down as well as employment being virtually hacked and the companies as well continuing to try and control their costs with the kind of meager sums or revenues that they garner from e-commerce, home delivery or cloud kitchens.